Welcome to A Date with Darkness podcast, where I will be discussing the impact of hurtful and abusive relationships and how to overcome them so that you can move through your pain and get to the kind of healthy relationships you want, need, and deserve. I'm Dr. Natalie Jones. I'm a licensed psychotherapist based in California. While I hope that you find this podcast educational and informational, please note it should not be substituted for treatment with a licensed mental health professional. Also, due to the nature of the podcast, some of the information presented on the show can be sensitive to some of my listeners, so please note that listener discretion is advised. Hello and welcome back to another installment of A Date with Darkness podcast. If you are new to the show, hello and welcome. I'm super excited to have you on, have a show today planned with a very special guest, a longtime friend of the show, Dr. Donna Oriowo. So Dr. Donna and I on social media, we kind of got into, we piqued each other's interests over a recent interview that hit the internet streets. And this interview was with Jasmin Brown and Shan Boudram, an intimacy expert. And the interview was on submissiveness in relationships. And I've really seen an increase in people requesting typically submissive female partners. Recently, there was quite a bit of uptick in sort of exploring submissiveness in relationships in light of Kevin Samuels, who is a popular YouTuber. He really sort of touted that, if you will. But I think the way that the word submissiveness is used in a lot of cases can be misunderstood, or it can be confused a lot of the times with emotional abuse. And I wanted to do this podcast specifically on this episode that I heard with Shan Boudram and Jasmin Brown, because a lot of the elements that I heard in the podcast were more indicative of emotional abuse as opposed to submissiveness. And so Dr. Donna and I really break that down, tease that apart, and go over it with each other. And this interview is a quick and dirty, right to the point interview. And I definitely linked a copy of the Shan Boudram and Jasmin Brown interview if you have not heard it. It was very widely publicized. It really set the internet afire with that interview. And I want to preface this by saying that, I'm in no way trying to shame um, anyone, or I'm not trying to judge anyone. I'm just a therapist that works a lot with people who have experienced emotional abuse, narcissistic abuse, psychological abuse, financial abuse, all types of abuse in the relationships. I've worked with perpetrators of violence also. And when I work with clients, or when I've done work around emotional abuse and so on and so forth, there's certain buzzwords or certain things that people say, and I'm like, okay, or even certain reactions that they may have to certain things, and I'm like, okay, this isn't a platonically healthy relationship. This is a relationship where there's clearly a power differential, a difference of power in the relationship in which one person completely has control over the other person. The other person is typically very passive. They typically have an extensive history of being abused in relationships. And so it becomes normalized, because if abuse is all you know, then that definitely becomes that can become a normalized behavior or a normalized pattern in your relationships. And for me, when I heard this interview, that's exactly what I thought of. And again, I can't diagnose But again, I've been doing this work a long time, and so I know when I hear certain things, it's like, I'm not sure that that relationship is emotionally healthy, and that submissiveness is a mutually agreed upon um, dynamic, as opposed to it's something that a person has been funneled into because there may have been an extensive history of abuse and potentially even some maybe some still going on based on what I'm hearing in the interview. I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are, and hopefully you'll listen. What I'd like for you to do, if you haven't already, check out the interview in the show notes, um, and then come back and listen to this episode with me and Dr. Donna, and let me know what your thoughts are. And so, without further ado, here's the episode with Dr. Donna and I. Welcome to the show, Dr. Donna. How are you?
I am doing well. Thank you for having me.
Of course. I love talking to you. So, real quick, can you break it down for us who you are and what you do in case the listeners don't know? They're just tuning in for the first time.
Absolutely. I am Dr. Donna Oriowo. I help Black women to get fabulous, free, and fucked, but therapeutically. I'm a sex and relationship therapist with a practice in the Washington, D.C. area that focuses on how colorism and texturism impact mental and sexual health, particularly access to pleasure.
Awesome, awesome. And you and we've been knowing each other for a while now. And I thought it was a good idea to come on and talk about Shan Booty's recent um, webcast, podcast, however you want to call it, where she had a woman that was talking about being submissive to her
Mhm.
partner. You and I had some interesting conversations back and forth on social media about that podcast or webcast. Can you break it down for us? This webcast of Shan Booties.
Um, Sham Booty had a conversation with, I believe her name is Jasmine.
Hmm.
Um, and the conversation was about submission and how to be submissive almost. And they were trying to have an honest conversation about what it is, what it means, and how it can be practiced, while trying to make sure that they are sort of, I think, understanding each other without judgment, which I was digging.
Yes, and so I think first of all there needs to be an understanding about what submissiveness is, right? So can you talk
Mhm.
a little bit about what is being submissive?
Honestly, there was a definition that Shan pulled from that I was like, oh, okay, I get that. I was like, that is probably the best definition of submission I've ever heard. And someone broke it down into its subparts, right? So you have sub, which is to be under or to follow whatever. And they gave examples, right? Of like a submarine is under the water, right?
Mhm.
And they said mission is that you are under the mission of this other person. So you submit to the mission that this
Mhm.
submission is about choosing to follow whatever the mission is that has been set by somebody else. So I was like, that's the best definition that I have ever heard that doesn't sound like utter bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I don't agree. I like the definition, but I don't agree that what the young woman on that particular podcast was doing was submissive. I mean, she described, and I'll definitely put a link to Shan Booty's episode in this podcast, but she sort of subscribed to the notion of, you know, uh, what was it that she was saying that really resonated? That she would kind of get up out of bed and kind of get up and do everything before her partner even asked. If he had a thought, that she would quickly do whatever she needed to do in order to better his quality of life before he even said anything.
Mhm.
And for me, that does not
I do
sound
not,
like,
yeah, I agree with you. I
yeah.
didn't feel like that was necessarily submission that she was practicing. I think that maybe there are various brands of submission, and hers is a I do all. As a matter of fact, it made me think more like acts of service, right? Maybe that's how she likes to give love, through this idea of acts of service. But there's also an infantilizing quality with not allowing somebody to speak and talk about the things that they want and need from you, because you are in so much in anticipation of what they could need, that you're attempting to meet those needs before they are ever voiced, before anyone ever asks. And it also, funnily enough, and then she actually said it in the podcast, she does not voice her needs. And that is an area that she noted that she struggles with. And I'm looking like, well, why would you voice your needs when you live in anticipation of someone else's? Number one, it doesn't give a lot of room. And number two, oftentimes the thing that we set for ourselves is something that we then also have expectations for others to do. So I'm like, if you're going above and beyond, which is a phrase that irks my soul, to meet this person's need, but it does feel accurate for what she was saying, then are you even leaving room for them to go above and beyond for you? And do you require it? And the answer to that seemed to be no, she does not require it.
It did, but for me, what stood out for me, and this is why I thought that perhaps there's some elements of emotional abuse there. When
Mhm.
someone is saying, not only do they not consider their own needs, but your partner is not considering your needs either, right? Like, because even if I'm with someone, or when I'm, even when I'm with someone, whether it be a friend or whatever, I'm always like, are you okay? Just kind of like that checking in. But if your partner is not checking in, and you're not checking in, and that seems to be the norm, right? And then you're sort of, thinking for this person, trying to meet their needs before they even think of them. That to me suggests that that's someone who's been conditioned in an abusive manner. That I should not have to ask for you to do the things that I want you to do. That
Mhm.
you need to be doing the bare minimum. Is you need to be thinking of me. It's almost kind of like this walking on eggshells element, and that's kind of what stood out for me. And I don't know if what your thoughts are on that, because I knew when I responded to your post, you were kind of like, say more about that. And I think that's the difference between submissiveness. Submissiveness is an agreement, but there is a need that's being met through submission. That is an agreement, and both partners' needs are still being met.
Mhm. She describes her needs as to give freely, and for that what she gives to be accepted.
Mhm.
So that's how she described her needs. And I was just like, okay, if that's what you say you need, is that need being fulfilled in the context of this relationship? And as far as she's concerned, her answer is yes. And she is happy and joyful within the experience of the relationship that she has cultivated. Now, it may not be one that I agree with,
Yeah.
but I can't disagree about her relationship on her behalf, right? I do agree that there seems to be some abusive or not resolved elements. She talked about how this is something that she saw in her mother, that her mother constantly was in the space of giving and giving and
Yes.
giving. So I'm looking like, well, that right there would be the initial conditioning, as it were. You saw this thing, and that is what you decided that you were also going to be, consciously or unconsciously. Um, and then on top of that, I think that there's a lack of understanding of the ways in which relationships could work,
Sure.
because she is modeling so much from this initial interaction that she
Mhm.
saw between her parents. And I don't know that she is seeing it as, like, some of the questions that she asked back, some of the comments that she made in the podcast episode, she seemed almost in disbelief when Shan Boudram made note of the egalitarian nature of her own relationship,
Yes.
how she is able to talk to her partner
Yes.
about, I want more of this, or I need less of
Mhm.
this, or I need to not think about this. She was just
Mm.
like, really? How is that received? And when she asked, how is that received? It made me wonder, okay, have you asked
Yes.
before in the past, how was it received for you? And my understanding now, I don't know if this tea is real tea because I did not look it up, but my understanding is that she is dating a football player,
Mm,
who is thus, making however, whatever football players make. That is my understanding. She's seeing a football player. So I'm wondering then, is there also an element of economic abuse that requires this submission with quotes, right? That to put her in this particular space. I do not disagree that maybe she loves giving freely and to do so. I think that that might still be her zhuzh, but it doesn't mean that doesn't mean that it's not abuse. But I'm looking like, if you don't think it's abuse, I'm not gonna call it abuse on your behalf. I'm gonna say what it sounds like sounds weird and off,
yeah.
particularly because even Shan in that interview made mention like, okay, does he do that for you? No. But then the idea that you could think about yourself that way, she said that she was almost embarrassed, right, by how much she considers and gives to him, that she is not also giving and considering for herself. She said that out of her own mouth. So I think that there's some introspective work that has yet to be done, and it is showing up in how she shows up in these relationships.
And that's abusive and for me. And this isn't to I want to make it clear that I'm not trying to shame anybody. I'm not trying to ostracize or degrade anybody, but more so awareness. Because here's the thing. I specialize in working with people that are in abusive relationships. People that come to me and that are in abusive relationships, I would say about 99.9 of them don't necessarily consider what they're in to be abusive situations. And some of them have been in
Agreed.
pretty extreme, borderline torturous relationships, but they don't name that or they don't consider that because, hey, I love this person, right? And
Yeah. I
abuse seems
do
like
the
a
same
very
thing when we're
harsh word.
defining sexual abuse.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So they never really call it that. And just because they don't call it that, or they don't have the words, or they don't have the awareness, a lot of times they say, because I love someone, they would never do that to me. That seems a little like someone that I love would never do that to me. So it's more about the
Mm.
awareness of like, hey, this is what some of this stuff sounds like to me from two different experts within the field, and just sort of having a discussion about it.
Yeah. I find that I will give a broad definitions, like, well, here are the things that would be considered, that is on the wheel of power and control, which is one of my
Yes,
favorite tools to use.
yes,
Here is a definition of violence. Here is a definition of abuse. Um,
yes,
and then I will place the onus on me in that
yeah,
space, right? So I'm looking like, when I hear this story,
yes,
I hear I hear and see abuse.
yes,
You are not hearing and seeing that. What are you hearing and seeing?
yes.
Um,
I
because
agree.
my definition of it being abusive is of no use if they don't agree and if they don't believe that they're there. And I think that she doesn't believe that it is an abusive relationship. She believes that it is simply the relationship that she has most desired. And I think that it is the relationship that she knew, and that was what she was doing, and that she learned to love it, though I doubt that. I doubt that there's a
Yeah,
true loving of it. I think that it
absolutely.
is the thing that she knows how to do.
Right.
And when we have competence in something, I think that we are want to continue to do that thing, even if
Yes.
that thing doesn't actually feel good for us. There's a
Yes.
piece that feels good simply because, oh, I know how to do this. And she said, I make it easy for a man to be with me because they don't have to do much. And I was just
That's
like,
yes.
wow. And neither
Yes.
do you,
Yeah.
right? Because if they don't have to do much, you also don't have to say much. You
Mhm.
don't have to talk about the things
You
that
don't
you
have
need.
an
It means that you don't
identity.
even have to know yourself.
Yeah. You don't have an identity, and that's
Word.
kind of, that's the difference, I think, between the abuse or abusiveness. Abusiveness, there's an element of being invisible. Right, and that's what stands out to me, that wanting to sort of be invisible versus, again, submissiveness, it's an agreement. I'm very much seen as an equal, but we have this agreement, we have this arrangement in the relationship, and my needs are being very fulfilled.
Mm.
I have an
And I think that
identity.
pop cultural definitions of submission do not promote equality
Yeah,
among the people who are
yes,
within a submissive relationship. And because of the definition that was giving that I am submitting to this mission, I'm
yes,
just like, well, can you identify what the mission is that this person is taking you on? What ways are they adhering to this mission, and what ways do you help to support this mission as well?
yes.
And I didn't hear elements of that in the interview at all, and that is
Mm,
why I was just like, submission, because it doesn't sound like submission. As a matter of fact, I realized that in how I built Annod Right, we submit in Annod Right. Like all the therapists, like if you work for Annod Right, then you submit to Annod Right's mission. I'm looking like, is this a mission that you can get down with? Is this a mission? This is the mission that leads the work that you're doing. If you are unable to submit to this mission, then this is probably not the best place for you. I'm looking like, if you don't like Black women, for example, maybe don't work here,
yeah,
right? Like if you don't like Black women, you probably shouldn't work here because you're going to encounter a lot of them. If you're not invested in their sexual freedom, their mental wellness, their sexual wellness, their access to pleasure, their self-definition, maybe this is not the best place for you. But and that is what I see as a submission to a mission. And we submit all the time to the mission of the place that we go to work. And in some ways, we even submit to the idea of
I
what a
agree.
romantic relationship is supposed to be.
I agree.
Some of us, we fail to define for ourselves what the mission of our individual relationships look like, friendships, partnerships, etc. But I'm looking like, if you are unable to identify the mission, then there is no submitting to a mission. You are submitting to a person and trusting that person not to lead
Mhm.
your ass off the deep end. And often the person that we're submitting to is the one that our culture has deemed as being someone that should have power. We
Yes.
bow to penises or to men or to people who identify as men or masculine people. We bow to white supremacy, including within relationship dynamics. I see people bowing and instead submitting to whoever the lighter skinned partner is.
Mm.
So
Mm.
there's constant submission, as it were, to the power structures that we have learned, but no out loud talk of what this mission is and why we
Yes.
are submitting to it in that way. So I would argue that I haven't seen very many submissive relationships, period, because most people couldn't tell you what the mission is.
Mm. Okay. 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 You sat us down. You sat us down. You sat us down. Right. And I think that's a powerful statement for a lot of people to hear. And I'm so glad that you said that and you snatched us by our roots and sat us right on back. Because there are a lot of people that do throw that word around, like you said, now and say, I submit, and they don't really have an understanding of what that means or what that looks like. And there is a delicate line between how people are using the word now and I think abusiveness or um,
It's
control.
mostly it's That's exactly what it is. I think more
Control.
people are in a space of power and control,
Yeah.
and they see submissiveness as a way to gain power and control
Yes.
of someone else.
Yes.
And when I think of power and control, I'm thinking more of, you don't want to make decisions for yourself, you want to make decisions for their self.
Yeah.
You don't want to just choose what's best for you want to choose what's best for them. Um, And sometimes I'm wondering to what end, but sometimes the end is simply so that they can feel better about themselves. Like, I make your decision so I feel better about myself. I feel
Mm,
powerful and I feel seen and I feel virile,
mhm.
or whatever word someone might use to describe themselves. And it makes me think about like worldwide superpowers, right? There's a language that is used in first world, third world, right? Like we're saying, oh,
Mm,
they're third world, and we automatically have this view of what a third world country is supposed to be, as though they lack in technology, when in reality it's not that they don't lack in the ways that we believe that they lack. As a matter of fact, most of them are rather abundant in their natural
yes,
resources. Is that those natural resources are being stolen by first world countries.
yeah,
So when I think of that, I when I think about power and control, I'm thinking about how we take the resources from someone else so that we have what we need, but they don't. So that we are feeling bigger and powerful and we have more than what we need, while they don't even have baseline. So when people talk about a desire to have power, I wonder what they mean, because what I've seen practiced is, I don't just want power and dominion over me. I want power and dominion over you so
you,
that I have an overflow, even if that means that you are neglected, even if that means that you don't have what you need, even if you're at a deficit. I will snatch from you so that I will overflow.
yeah. And that, again, I'll stand by it. To me, that's abusive. That is
Yeah,
parasitic. That is abusive.
yeah.
So, just those are just my thoughts on it. And I'm glad that you were here to drop some gems, but we are closing with those words. You dropped a lot of powerful gems. So I appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much, Dr. Donna.
Thank you. And I think you may have also changed my mind,
Oh, oh,
because
oh,
it was definitely like a question. I was just like, well, is this abuse? Can we classify it as abuse? And while we don't know the full scope, and
we
I want to
don't,
make
we
sure
don't,
we add
we
that
don't.
caveat that we don't know her, we don't know
Yeah,
the full scope, we don't know the
yeah,
ins and outs, based off what was presented, based on our definition now of submission,
absolutely.
based now on our understanding of power, control, and abuse. This feels like it goes in there, because she's talking about how she does not have
Yes,
what she needs, and
yes.
she does not even get what she needs from herself, let alone from her
Yes.
partner.
Yes. And I wish, I wish, there's sometimes we wish we had certain clients that we could work with and we could help them out. That's my one wish. And I do have a lot of respect for her as well as the host. So I want to make sure that people are aware that this is not in any way to tear her down because I am considering her,
Well,
but also because she went
I would
on
say
an,
it's not about her at all.
it's not about
Like,
her.
it's not really about her. It's
Yeah,
for
but
the
you
women who, for the people who find themselves
yeah.
sitting in the same position that she already sits in, but have not considered
Yes.
the parameters of the things that they are doing and or saying, because I think that is very easy for us to not give true thought to it. I think that sometimes we move in almost an autopilot where we don't have to consider. And
Yes.
I think that when we are considering, you might see things a little bit differently. And this is also my
Yes.
point to say, like, don't be afraid to change your mind. Don't be
Yes.
afraid that when new knowledge comes in, you might have a very different view of something, and that um, it is it's stagnation to say that my original thought is the only good thought, and that there can never be any growth or change
Yeah.
in thought. And I
Yeah.
think that sometimes we do, as a people,
Yeah.
get stuck in that.
Yeah, we do get stuck in that. And I appreciate once again you saying that. And I love having you here as always, a friend of the show. So thank you so much, Dr. Donna.
Thank you.
Okay, so that interview with Dr. Donna and I definitely had a very interesting turn. And she's always a fun person to talk to. I love, love, love chatting with her because I love her to hear her difference of opinion, and I love to hear her wisdom and her knowledge. And she's so wonderful at what she does. So I'd love to hear what your thoughts were on the show. And until next time, guys, take care of yourselves and be well.